الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Kindly straighten the rows. Safi Sidi farma lijiye. Allahu Akbar. Subhanakallah. Allahu Akbar. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله الله أكبر استغفر الله
Respected elders and brothers, Jamiatul Banat Tankara is a girls' madrasa in India, Gujarat. This institute has approximately 550 students who study the Alima class together with their schooling, GCSE and A-level equivalent. To sponsor one student only costs £150. My brothers, these are the last few days of Ramadan where we increase our intensity and frequency of giving and our ibadah. So please donate generously from your zakat, sadaqah and lillah. We are here until Maghrib. I also want to thank you for your ongoing support through your du'as and also through your contributions. Jazakumullah khairan.
Inshallah, after the remaining dua, a very important program about understanding and managing digital addiction will take place, and our guest speaker today is Hafiz Suhail Ugradar, who will talk about this topic inshallah with a presentation. So all brothers are requested to please stay behind and benefit from this program. Jazakumullah. Alhamdulillah. اللهم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله. All youngsters are requested to please come forward as well. Can someone at the back switch the front row lights off? आइए बंद कर दो फ्रंट लाइन जज़ाकल्लाह
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم. Respected brothers, elders, teachers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Last year it was a very candid talk which I did here, alhamdulillah, and through that presentation and that talk. So last year was a very candid and open talk which I did in front of you. And through that talk, alhamdulillah, there was quite a few individuals who came forward with several different queries about the difficulties that they've been experiencing. So the theme of this year, we wanted to keep it very much the same, but focusing more broadly on digital media and addiction in kind of general. So I'm no expert in social media or anything. However, what my field is around addictions, developing courses and supporting people in the community with difficulties along those particular lines. Now, social media is something that we are all exposed to, and on a daily basis we are exposed to it, and also what we consume from it affects us, impacts us in our lives. And it's quite important that we understand the idea of social media and its impact upon individuals in terms of their mental health and well-being. Okay? Now, if we consider young people or a child and how, when they are young, before we decide to give that child anything, we will consider the implications of what we are giving to that child. So, for example, if a young person, they are intending to drive, then before they drive, they will undergo a theory test, a practical test, and focusing more on a young person, then before we give our child anything, then we'll consider the implication, the positives, the negatives. Now, when we think of giving a phone to a young person today and giving a phone to a young person in, for example, the year 2000 or 1990s, then it's a whole different conversation. You're giving a Nokia, which at most had Snake, the game on, and could call their parents or relatives. Nothing more and nothing less, okay? However, now the conversation is very different, where if you give a phone to a young person, that in that phone there is everything possible in order to, if there was something to inflict harm and distress on that individual, then that phone is capable of doing so. So we need to really understand that so sometimes we use this term quite willy-nilly, addiction, or you're addicted to this, you're addicted to that. However, to understand what it really is quite important. So within our brain, there are certain places of our brain where addiction actually takes place. And this is no different to, for example, drugs, alcohol, gambling, or social media, okay, or digital media. So you're talking about gaming, or you're talking about use of your phone, okay? So within, what happens in our brain is called neurochemistry. Now, within our brain itself, there are certain regions of our brain which are responsible for some experiencing pleasure, okay? So we experience pleasure in our brains through activities such as it could be eating, it could be socializing with friends, spending time with family, or doing a hobby, okay? Our brain releases chemicals. So if we look at that statistic there, on an average daily basis, 28 times an individual might look at their phone, okay? And if we consider this in terms of the impact upon our brain, where something maybe recreational, sometimes we do, it becomes habitual, we do it every single day, okay? So exploring what drives our compulsive behavior. So what drives a person to stay on their phone and consume social media every single day and every hour of the day, okay? There are certain chemicals in the brain. Now there is a place in the brain called the ventral stratum. That's an area where initially we do something, then this area is responsible for directing pleasure, okay? Making you feel that pleasure or processing pleasure, okay? So our brain, it lights up, okay? So it could be that a person is playing a sport, as an example. Whilst they're doing that activity, they're experiencing a sensation, and it's a positive one, okay? Your brain recognizes that something that needs to be done again. Now, so it's known as the processor of rewards. Following on from that, so this is something that we do on and off, okay? So for example, if you have an activity, coming to the masjid, praying Quran, these are all different activities that we tend to do. In order to encourage us to do it again, our brain releases that chemical. However, this particular area called the dorsal stratum is known as the habit hub. Okay, this is where habits are actually formed. Okay, if a person consistently does something, then this area of the brain is responsible to ensure that it happens on a regular basis. So this is known as the brain's pleasure or reward center. Now, when we do something, so if a person is on their phone, if they're on an app or something, reading the news or scrolling Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or any particular kind of app, then what we must recognize is that their brain is releasing dopamine in this particular moment. So imagine the amount of dopamine that is released at each like or each hit or each comment or each post or each interaction with that particular app. So when that happens, our brains are forming connections, okay? So these are connections in our brain. So this is not just an AI generated picture, it's an actual how our brain internally kind of operates, okay? And these neural pathways or these connections, what they do is they help make that behavior automatic over time, okay? So if we can imagine an individual who is gaming, who's on the FIFA, PlayStation or something, and they're spending excess amounts of time on these particular apps or consoles, then their brain, because it's experiencing that pleasure, wants it to do it again, then creates a pattern in the brain through the neural pathway to ensure that that behavior is kind of repeated. Now, the brain is doing this automatically without us realizing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us all with a part of the brain, the front one, known as the prefrontal cortex. That is known as the executive function. This is responsible for making rational, sensible kind of choices. Okay, when that particular part of the brain, the dorsal stratum, the habit centers, they become activated, this one says, hold on, we need to stop this, or we need to do something different. Okay, so this is the front part of the brain, and it's responsible for making executive choices, okay, or sensible to rational choices. So it's the decision maker within our brain itself. So however, what happens when an individual is overindulging in certain activities, then this particular part of the brain, the front part of the brain, is affected, is impacted. And what happens is inhibited, it becomes weaker, and the other part of the brain overrides those decisions. Okay, so that person can no longer function rationally, okay, can't make those particular choices which are meant to be made. So we sometimes consider whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol or any type of activity, even a person engaging in excess gaming or spending time on their phone on different particular apps or platforms, and we think to ourselves that why are they spending hours on end on this particular activity? Because they're wasting time, or they're just silly, or they choose to do this. However, what we must recognize is they are getting internally, intrinsically, something they are getting, they're benefiting from it. Hence why they keep doing that, okay? So the habitual use of digital kind of media weakens the prefrontal cortex, okay? So that part of the brain which is responsible for making rational choices becomes weaker. Okay, so how are we supposed to support that individual? How can we leave 11, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old to actually make those choices, okay? That you should know when you need to stop, okay? Or for example, if we've given a kind of a timetable to that individual that at this particular time you need to stop playing on that game, and then you need to decide on your own to do something, then it's very difficult, because we know that in the mid-20s, that's when our brain reaches a level of maturity. Before that, it's always developing. So it's very difficult for young people to all of a sudden stop something. That's why we have controls on apps, parental controls and different things like that in order to stop it, okay? In order to stop it. So what we need to consider, and the important message here is that before we embark on that journey of giving our children mobile phones, smartphones and these devices, it's important to consider our conversation with them, okay, in terms of the usage, okay, and how we will use it in a way that will benefit them. So I mentioned how it becomes kind of weaker. Now in talking about there are many benefits of social media and using the internet. So I'm not here to kind of discuss the benefits of it, the positives of it, because someone is kind of will seek that benefit anyway. However, sometimes we are not always aware of the negative impact of it. Or what happens is when it gets really bad, that's when we tend to realize that, okay, there's something seriously wrong with your gaming or with your use of particular kind of apps, okay? So these particular apps are, the algorithms and the way they are designed are designed to ensure that we stay on them for the maximum duration, okay? And they mold us as individuals. And this goes directly kind of contradictory to our values, our Dini Islamic kind of values, where we're supposed to hone the personality of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sharia, okay? That's our guide, where we should be molding is towards that direction. But without actually realizing, we are molding ourselves, and our children are being molded in the direction where social media is kind of taking them. So if you look at the first one, so this is quite popular, where in social media, in Instagram and those particular apps, we will find people like couples or individuals talking about themselves, okay? So this is where egoism and narcissistic type of traits come in without even realizing, okay? Nobody sets out to do this. So they're talking about their lives, they're talking about their personal, most intimate things about them, okay? And there's another person sat in their room, you know, isolated. Maybe they haven't been blessed with some of the things that they have. However, those individuals who are on those particular apps are portraying a very different life in contradiction to what actually is happening in their life. And the response is that the people who are watching are feeling inadequate. Gosh, if only I had this. I don't have anything. Or look at their life. Look at their partner. You know, mashallah, they've got such a beautiful relationship. Look at mine. So automatically what tends to happen is these kind of YouTube, for example, is quite common for this, Instagram, where people consume this on a daily basis, and what it does, it erodes and it breaks down a person's self-esteem, and it leads to feelings of inadequacy, okay, where they feel, I've got nothing, okay, and that leads to depression, anxiety, they don't want to socialize, they don't want to do anything better about it. And the most harmful thing about it is that it's actually fake, okay, where we take it for granted that these particular lifestyles that individuals consume are actually real, or in reality that this is what's actually happening behind the scenes. Okay, so it's something that we really need to consider, because if you look at the lifestyle of our pious predecessors, then they were very concerned at what their children consumed. They wouldn't let anybody teach their children. But today what's happening is that our children, ourselves, we are being taught without realizing on these particular platforms, and most of the time which is creating a very negative impact upon us. Okay, so focusing on the aspect of consuming content which develops feelings of inadequacy and feelings of hopelessness within an individual, this is directly unrelated to what our deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever tests or trials that He kind of puts in our path, then we are expected to undergo them through patience and prayer, okay, through salah, through patience. However, what this does is it leads a person to hopelessness. And there have been many cases in Preston, in the wider area, where through consuming this content, people have become disengaged with their deen, their religion, even to the fact that they have been questioning whether Allah exists or not, okay, because of that particular, because they are left to their own devices on these particular platforms. So when we are giving our devices, those devices to young people, we need to really be mindful who they are listening to, what they are watching, okay? Because a lot of times there are many people who do da'wah, inverted commas, online. However, they are unregulated, meaning do they have a teacher, or do they have a kind of a qualification in that particular area? So it's something really important to consider, because what it can do more harm than good itself. The increased isolation. So the whole idea, so if you imagine a person on these particular platforms, then they engage or they converse with these platforms on their own, okay? They are isolated. And what it tends to do is it breeds isolation. When an individual is disconnected from their support network, from their parents, from their family members, and they're on their own. So if they're gaming, as an example, they're in their bedroom on their own. They've got a whole gaming setup there. Everything is ready. They don't need to come downstairs. Food, everything, etc. is delivered to that individual. Then they don't really need to connect with the outside world, because what they have done is they have built up their own kind of community online. Okay, and this is the battle that we have, is that individuals have built their own communities, and this is where ideologies can be changed. This is where an individual can develop very negative kind of coping mechanisms, so they'll get involved in things which are not good for them, and spending more time on this kind of superficial kind of apps and activities leads to more depression, leads to more anxiety. So if they are increasingly isolated on these particular devices, what will happen is that they will develop social anxiety. We tend to use this term, again, very loosely. Anybody who's awkward slightly or doesn't like meeting people, oh, well, he's got social anxiety. But it's very real, because the more a person is not engaging, then what tends to happen is they develop a fear of engaging with real people. So once they become disconnected with engaging with real people, then they also lose that self of empathy as well, because they're not actually looking at people suffering, or the body language, the tone of voice as an example, but everything's online, okay? So the online kind of a person who develops that presence or personality online risks losing that level of empathy that we need, okay? So obviously that brings the onset of social anxiety disorder. The other one is, we call it FOMO, fear of missing out, okay? So that for example, TikTok, the algorithm is set up in such a way that there is bottomless bottomless scrolling that you do. It never ends. And even if you click on a particular video, then it'll send you notifications that you previously watched this video. There's something very similar to that. So it kind of sucks you in. The whole modus operandi of these apps is to actually keep an individual glued to it, okay, and spend as much time as they can on those particular kind of platforms, because they are generating an income from it. And the other thing is that through, for example, apps like TikTok, etc., then you also have advertisements kind of taking place, which potentially could lead individuals to go into, for example, people may have heard of TikTok battles and things like this, gifting, etc., putting themselves into debt in order to kind of make themselves look like they're gifting a lot of money, etc. So this is where the narcissistic or egoism tends to come in, because the whole foundation of those influencers or that the particular apps is self-centered, okay, is to always focus on the self, focus on the individual. Now, something really important, that when we are kind of online and we are on Twitter and on X or these particular kind of apps, all and very good, we might get a lot of news and information which is maybe not from the BBC or the mainstream kind of news apps. However, there is a real danger of becoming very kind of desensitized and overstimulated from the content that we kind of receive. Imagine a young person looking at a lot of the images. So if we think to ourselves that are we actually really supposed to consume this amount of knowledge and this amount of data, okay? Because whatever is happening in whichever part of the world, okay, the way the app is designed is that it makes you feel like you're missing out, okay? So you're spending more and more time looking at that news channel, this news channel, what this individual has said and what that individual has said. And that definitely would bring the onset of many difficulties, where a person will feel and most likely will develop a sense of low mood, low self-esteem, depression, because they can't fathom what's going on around the world. Okay, rather than focusing on their situation and what they can proactively do, they become despondent. Okay, and a lot of individuals start questioning the famous question about if God was all benevolent, what about evil and suffering in the world? So these type of questions then attack that individual, because they feel that they become bombarded with this particular overload of information from these particular kind of apps. So when we talk about egoism, we're focusing on like self-promotion culture. So it's all about people developing unique content, okay, content which is different, okay, content which is kind of unique. Okay, it's all about themselves. It's all about gaining the most likes, the most views, the more subscribers we have, okay? It's all about the self, okay? Imagine what it does to the spirituality of an individual, okay? Really focusing on themselves all the time. So that tends to then develop behavior like validation seeking, like seeking behaviors where what can I do to actually garner more kind of followers? What can I do to actually, what's something different, what can I do which is something outrageous or daring or different to gain kind of more followers? So this leads to comparison and envy. And envy, looking at other people and then developing a sense that I don't have that, I wish they had that as well, jealousy, etc. And all this through those particular apps, without us even realizing, scrolling through pages and post and upon post, how much damage is it inflicting upon our soul, upon our spiritual kind of self. And what people tend to do then is develop echo chambers, okay? You might have heard confirmation bias, where people only subscribe or stay with people who agree with their sort of mentality, okay? And they develop this community. You might have heard previously the incel type community, and on Reddit and these particular apps you have different types of communities where people become attached to. And if it's negative and it's not good, then they breed those particular kind of ideas, okay? So this is not meant to put you off using kind of social media, but it's just to understand that if we are encouraging our children, or if our children have access to these particular platforms, to these particular devices, then we really need to start an education program at home in order to encourage safe use of them, okay? And especially big advocate in terms of within our curriculum as well, a madrasa curriculum, to incorporate a lot of this, okay? Because we look at the mental health impact of it, that people spending excessive time on these particular, and affecting them, impacting them, where family members are concerned that they're not socializing, not coming down, not talking with us. And when you take it from them, then you see the aggressive and, you know, that kind of behavior being exhibited. I'm going to now move on towards another area which we probably are all aware, are loot boxes and like FIFA packs and things like that. So FIFA packs are like loot boxes or packs that you can buy on PlayStation, on the FIFA game, and you pay money in order to get players at random, okay? And many people want Messi, Ronaldo and these particular type of players, but you have to buy them, okay? You have to buy these, so they're based on chance. And in this particular country, it's legal, but in some other countries, it's illegal to purchase these, or this facility is not available because their particular governments say this is gambling. So the definition of gambling itself is that to stake something or risk something based on the outcome of something which involves chance, okay? So if we look at this, that many adults as well are buying these FIFA packs for real money. You're buying something for real money based on the outcome of something which kind of involves chance. Although you might say, okay, I can't really convert these players or sell them for real money, the behaviors of it is very akin and alike to kind of gambling. So when young people are doing this, what it does is it kind of triggers and it encourages that gambling-like type of behavior. So there are many other games as well. So Fortnite have them, CSGO, and sometimes they get them for free, other times they have to buy them. And when they buy them and they receive these particular mystery gifts, they're just cosmetic features in that particular game. A lot of times they can gamble them, sometimes they can sell them as well. You know, there was somebody who sold like a skin, that's a skin for a gun, okay? They sold that for £3,000, you know, just. So it has some monetary value, okay? So when our young people are online, they are kind of faced with many of these particular things, okay? And these like loot boxes, etc., according to many people, they are deemed to be gambling, okay? So, and if we look at games like 8-ball pool and those particular app type games where we spend quite a lot of our time, then eventually what they try and do is encourage you to pay money in order to spin a wheel or purchase something. So I think we need to be really really aware of what these particular games have within them, and if something involves anything like that, to really scrutinize it before we allow young people especially to kind of consume these particular apps or activities. Now, the main kind of question here is that previously we did a talk on the gambling itself, you know, the impacts of it, trauma, etc., etc. It's all good and well doing a talk about this, but, you know, what advice is actually there, you know? So, you know, many a times I would assume that people are unfettered access to these apps, okay, or they're unboundaried, because some parents are maybe just don't have the time maybe to invest in learning or putting controls, or they have put controls in, but they haven't been successful in kind of exerting any sort of rigid kind of routine where children will come on and off these particular apps, or ourselves, you know. It's important to start ourselves, whether we are any good at regulating ourselves when we're consuming this kind of these apps. So it's important to have open communication. It's no good kind of ranting and raving and shouting and, you know, this kind of behavior when we tend to find out that our son, for example, or daughter is spending excess amount of time on a particular app, and through that app we have found out some things which are not good for that individual. Oh, I'm going to ban you, that's it, this is going to be without a phone. I think it's quite important to have an open communication and empathetic, because we need to realize that we've given this device to our young people, and they themselves don't know what's there. Okay, if we look at the, a phone itself has access to everything, from pornography to drugs. A person can buy drugs online. Okay, so we need to be aware that we have provided these kind of smartphones or these devices. So have that open communication around the expectations, around if their behavior has gone contrary to what you kind of intended to be, then having that kind of conversation, where it's two-way conversation. Okay, set clear boundaries. So we have these parental controls, especially with the PlayStation and these games console. Individuals can spend hours. I remember I had an individual in my class who was doing hifz, and he became addicted to his PlayStation, and eventually he lost his hifz, and his game time was in weeks and months. Okay, his game time, the amount of time he was actually. So it's important to actually set boundaries, because we can assume somebody is in their bedroom doing whatever, but we really need to be accountable. Okay, and we have to encourage alternative kind of activities, and this is quite an important one, where activities are quite especially for young people, that it's quite easy to occupy them with devices, because they'll be quiet, they'll be really, imagine on a particular game or an app, how many dopamine hits are they receiving? Their attention is going haywire. Okay, and especially for children with ADHD, it's not really good to be spending excess amount of times online anyway. So I think it's an easy cop-out if we say that, okay, we're just gonna, okay, you can go on go and watch something, or put this on, put Coco Melon on, put that on, put this on. I think we really need to invest in keeping our children active. Okay, so I know in our community we have the scouts and these things, but if you look at the waiting list and things like that, it's really difficult to actually keep occupied. I remember, even if we look at the facilities out there, the football pitches or these, but some are not inclusive. They don't easily allow young people to take part, maybe because you have to pay for it, whatever. So really, as a community, beyond looking at bricks and mortar, we need to think about how we can invest in activities, in things to keep our young people occupied. Illa mashallah, there's really good things taking place, but these kind of activity, what will help is, it will help divest or take away attention from these, or reliance on these particular kind of apps, the technology, because technology is profane, it's superficial, and its impact is not positive. Okay, and when an individual is involved outdoors with activities, then inevitably they are benefiting from it through character development, moral development, all sorts of benefits there. So I think if there was one important thing in there, it would be to encourage alternative activities. And the other would be that if you do find yourself or your children or somebody who is spending excess amount of times, then I think it's important to look at seeking professional help if all other help has been availed of. Okay, because what we are setting ourselves to do by just trying to deal with it ourselves is actually make the problem more worse, because we might not have the relationship and the trust with that individual to actually make a change or to encourage behavior change. So let's leave it to somebody else who could actually foster an open dialogue with the individual. Okay, and I think monitoring and supervising, so it's an ongoing process. So this wasn't meant to kind of deter you from using those devices or anything, but it's really to take an inventory and account of not mindlessly just downloading and uploading and using these particular apps, because they can be incredibly damaging. So if we, especially for young people whose brains are just developing, because their personalities are developing through these particular apps. Okay, and as the saying goes, stupidity sells, and these YouTube shorts and all these different things, that's what they do. They garner, encourage more views through stupidity. They'll do outrageous and silly things. There was a craze not so long ago, quite a few years ago, where individuals, those washing machine tablets, they consume them just for a craze. Okay, so many things are there, and our young people kind of tag on because it looks cool, it looks okay. So I think it's quite important that we spend time in learning about those particular apps, you know, and then looking at, you know, what is best for our children, what is best for our community, especially going forward, looking at maybe investing time to encourage our young people to participate in other kind of activities. Okay, so happy to kind of take any questions that we may have around this or any kind of related topics, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Any questions you may have, happy to answer, inshallah. How much time is enough time? It's a good question. I think especially around gaming, they say up to 4 hours a day is excessive in terms of gaming. So you work it out from there. And when it comes to our phones, spending time on the apps, etc., I think it's about looking at productivity. You know, if you are, for example, just sitting there waiting for something, you know, there are many other things an individual can do rather than just mindlessly kind of scrolling things. I think it's about looking at taking the useful from those particular apps that we're on and then drawing a line, you know, where it becomes kind of excessive. And for young people, I think it's very hard for them to kind of draw that line, especially children, on their gaming or those particular consoles. So we'll have to be between, I think, 2 hours in a day would be kind of acceptable. Anything more than that, they say, it is kind of excessive. And what it does eventually is that it lowers the attention deficit of an individual, because these apps and these consoles are designed to keep children entertained, okay? And for that, the scenes kind of change very rapidly, very colorful, bright lights, etc. And it kind of, then when they're sitting in a maths lesson at school, they're just not invigorated or motivated to do anything. So it's also looking at not always thinking that I really need to entertain my child, you know, but you know, there is a book, they can read a book as well, okay? So I think encouraging that sort of behavior, being outdoors, I think that's quite important. You know, connecting our children with activities, with things, you know, making them more productive.
Is there a way to measure maybe when it's effectively an addiction or when it's just a bad habit?
Yeah, so a lot of times what happens if a person is spending quite a lot of time, you say you've got a phone addiction, but addiction generally, the definition is that negative consequences occur in an individual around them, and despite those negative consequences, they still pursue it, okay, they still kind of continue. So if it's a young person, it's affecting their studies, it's affecting their social life, their spiritual life, you know, as well. Despite that, they are adamant that this is something I want to do. So you know that this has reached compulsion. It's reached to the habitual. It's become very habitual. So we really need to do something from there, because before it gets progressively kind of worse. Okay, because then what they do is they only do it to kind of cope and manage. Okay, they don't want to go to a wedding. I want to stay here. I want to do this. I'll stay at home. I'm okay. So they'll avoid kind of doing anything because that's their safe space. Like I mentioned, that people develop their own personality online. They meet people online. They speak to people online. But generally speaking, they will meet people who are in their own echo chamber, okay, who subscribe to their own values, ideas, who agree with them, okay? And then what happens is that breeds kind of resentment for their own family, who are telling them that you need to stay away from this. So then there is this kind of conflict there. So it's about recognizing these it's very similar with friends. Okay, that's the same ideology that is applied online in the same way. Any more questions? So Ramadan is a good kind of opportunity to kind of detox from these particular kind of activities. And Ramadan is an example that we're able to actually do this, okay? We're able to exert ourselves and develop the, I would say, the habits and the willpower to actually make a decision, okay? Rather than allowing these apps to kind of dictate and just go with the flow like just water under a bridge. You know, we're taking control of our time. We're taking control because as we can remember, we need to be mindful that each and every moment in this world will be accounted for. Kiraman Katibin, writing down everything that we do, everything good, everything useless, everything useful. So it's something, for example, whatever happens in America and goes wrong in America tends to come to the UK very soon. So in America there was the opioid kind of crisis. Pain management medication was given to people, and a lot of pharmaceutical companies made a lot of money out of it, okay? And a lot of people became addicted to it innocently. And then you had the fentanyl crisis as well, synthetic drugs, okay? And the government didn't do much about it, and it became really widespread. Now you hear it here, the fentanyl and even the opioid, where the NHS has employed pain management specialists to actually help people wean off those particular kind of drugs. So very soon, and there will be something similar around antidepressants in the same way. Although antidepressants very useful, you know, those who have that clinical need for it, helping them sleep, or clinically depressed, you know, only a professional can prescribe this. But we know that a lot of times when there are other things that we can do, the easy fix for a GP would be just to prescribe some antidepressants and we're okay. And very soon there'll be something similar around the overuse of kind of antidepressants. In the same way, I feel very much with social media, you know, these big companies, Instagram, Facebook, they're avoiding their responsibility. You know, we've heard many cases where young people have taken their own lives because on their streams they've been consuming that self-harm kind of content. The more they look at it, the more they have the different posts, and eventually some of the young people took their own lives. And it takes many people to do that before they bring in some sort of law. But however, our deen, we're supposed to be proactive, okay? Our deen, Sharia, is a proactive kind of scheme, deen which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. Before, you know, it does some harm to our time, to ourselves, to our well-being, I think we need to take some control. And Ramadan is a month where we are taking that control, you know, to take an inventory of how much time. I know a really good way of actually managing our time online was to log out of apps, you know, and every time we want to do something, we log in, have a look, then log back out, okay? Because if we're logged in, it's quite easy just to open it and there it is. This is a technique that someone online kind of shared. So there are several things that we can do, and I think what I mentioned is quite important, that every moment of our lives is accounted for. So it's quite important that we consider this when we spend time on our phones, on our TikTok, etc. Because, you know, it's not the fault of an individual that they're spending hours on end. The algorithms are kind of designed that way. There are people being paid thousands of pounds in Silicon Valley generally to actually develop these algorithms that like people like me and you stay glued onto it, okay? So I think it does take a concerted kind of effort to step back and think what we are doing with ourselves, okay, in terms of our usage with it. Allahumma صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على حبيبك المصطفى وعلى آله وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها عندك على الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت ربنا وتعاليك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك 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 ربنا وإليك المصير. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.